A life saved, a secret revealed. A night of miracles and mysteries. Dr. Samuel Carter had long abandoned the notion of sleep. As one of the leading pediatric surgeons at St. Vincent's Hospital, his world revolved around the ticking of the Orr clock, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, and the quiet whispers of fate that determined which children survived and which ones slipped away. At 44, he was revered in the medical community for his skill and dedication. Some call him a miracle worker, others, a machine. He preferred the latter. Miracles were unpredictable. Machines were precise, controlled, reliable. But all it took was one night, one case, to throw his meticulously structured world into chaos. The emergency call came just past midnight. Female patient, 5 years old. Car accident. Multiple internal injuries. BP dropping. ETA. 3 minutes. Dr. Carter was already moving before the call had even finished. His team scrambled into action, prepping the operating room, setting up transfusions, and reviewing what little information was available. "Any guardians?" he asked briskly as he scrubbed in. The ER nurse, Emily, looked up from the clipboard. "Mother's with her. No mention of a father." He nodded, filing that detail away as he entered the trauma bay, just as the paramedics wheeled in the small broken body. Blood soaked the little girl's dress. Her dark curls, matted and tangled, clung to her pale face. The mother, a woman in her early 30s, rushed alongside the stretcher, gripping the child's tiny fingers. "Please," she sobbed, her face pale with terror. "Please save her. She's all I have." Dr. Carter barely spared her a glance before focusing on his patient. "She needs surgery. Now." In the operating room, time became meaningless. Every move was calculated, every cut precise. His hands worked with the expertise honed over decades, mending torn tissue, sealing ruptured organs, and restoring the fragile heartbeat that had nearly faded away. The hours passed in a blur of blood and urgency, but finally, the storm settled. The child, Rosie, according to the chart, was stable. Dr. Carter exhaled for the first time in what felt like eternity, stripping off his gloves. Around him, the tension in the room lifted. The nurses exchanged tired but relieved smiles. It was a victory, a life saved, another battle won. But as he stepped into the waiting room, exhaustion creeping into his bones, he was met with something far more unsettling than any surgery. The mother, who had been waiting anxiously, rose to her feet the moment she saw him. "Your daughter is going to be okay," he said, his voice calm, professional. He had delivered this news 1,000 times before. But instead of relief, the woman paled. Her hands trembled as she clutched something against her chest. A weathered envelope. Dr. Carter frowned. "Ma'am." The woman, Maria, looked at him with something between guilt and hesitation. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words that would change everything. "She's yours." The past collides with the present. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Dr. Carter's mind refused to process the words. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, some kind of cruel joke. His eyes flicked to the child's name on the chart. Rosie Ellis. Ellis. That name sent a long-buried memory clawing its way to the surface. A summer 10 years ago. A love he had walked away from. A woman who had once held his heart. And her younger sister, Maria. He turned his gaze back to the woman before him, scanning her features with a surgeon's precision. She looked older than he remembered, her eyes carrying shadows that hadn't been there before. Life had not been kind to her. Dr. Carter's voice came out controlled, though he felt anything but. "What are you saying?" Maria swallowed hard, gripping the envelope like a lifeline. "I should have told you sooner. I know that. But She shook her head, forcing the words out. "Rosie is your daughter." A sharp, hollow silence followed. Dr. Carter took a step back, his breath suddenly feeling too shallow. No, this couldn't be happening. His carefully structured world, built brick by brick over years of control, discipline, and unwavering focus, was unraveling with every word she spoke. I tried to find the right time, Maria continued, voice trembling. But after Melissa died, his head snapped up at the mention of the name. Melissa, the woman he had once loved, the woman who had been Maria's sister. He felt like the floor had been ripped out from beneath him. You knew, he accused, his voice barely above a whisper. You knew, and you didn't tell me. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she stood her ground. I did what I thought was best. Dr. Carter let out a hollow laugh. Best for who? Certainly not for me. And definitely not for her. He gestured toward the door leading to Rosie's room. I missed 5 years of my own daughter's life. Maria flinched. I wasn't trying to keep her from you. Then what were you doing? His voice was sharp now, his control slipping. She finally extended the envelope she'd been holding. She left this for you. Hands trembling, Dr. Carter took the letter. It was old, the edges worn. His name was scrawled on the front in a handwriting he had once known better than his own. Melissa's. His breath caught as he slowly opened it, the past coming back to life in ink and paper. A message from the grave. Dear Sam, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And there's something I need you to know. Rosie is yours. I found out after we parted ways, but by then, the cancer was back, and I didn't want to trap you in a life of hospitals and goodbyes. I told Maria to raise her, to protect her. I know she's strong enough to do it, but I need you to know that Rosie deserves to know her father. She has your eyes, Sam. Your stubbornness, too. She's going to ask about you someday. And when she does, I hope Maria is brave enough to tell her the truth. I hope you are brave enough to come back. She's your daughter, Sam. Please, if there's any love left for me in your heart, be there for her. Melissa. Dr. Carter's grip on the letter tightened. His pulse roared in his ears. He read the words over and over, but they never changed. Melissa had known. Maria had known. And yet, he had spent 5 years oblivious. He lifted his gaze to Maria, the weight of 1,000 missed moments pressing down on him. First steps, first words, first birthdays, all gone. Does she know? He asked finally, his voice raw. Maria shook her head. Not yet. A shuddering breath left him. His daughter. His daughter. Everything he thought he knew had changed in a single night. He had saved Rosie's life. Now he had to figure out how to be a part of it. Learning to be a father. Shadows of the past. Samuel Carter had always known how to handle pressure. In the operating room, where life and death danced on the edge of a scalpel, his hands remained steady, his mind clear. He was in control. But now, standing outside the hospital's pediatric ward, staring at the door to room 302, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hesitation. His daughter was on the other side. A daughter he had never known. A child whose life had unfolded without him, whose first words, first steps, and first birthdays had passed in his absence. How was he supposed to make up for that? Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The room was softly lit, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filling the air. Rosie lay curled beneath a pastel-colored blanket, her small chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Her tiny hands clutched a worn-out stuffed bunny, its fur matted from years of love. Maria sat beside the bed, her fingers gently stroking Rosie's dark curls. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. She woke up for a little while earlier, Maria murmured. Asked about the nice doctor who saved her. Something in Sam's chest clenched. He cleared his throat. And what did you tell her? Maria hesitated, then looked away. That you'd check on her soon. He nodded, stepping closer. His gaze softened as he took in Rosie's features. The resemblance was undeniable. The curve of her nose, the shape of her chin, the tiny furrow between her brows, so much like his own when he was deep in thought. 5 years. 5 years of distance, of silence, of not knowing. He swallowed against the lump in his throat and turned to Maria. I want to be part of her life. Maria met his gaze. I need time to figure out how to tell her. I'm not asking for shortcuts, Sam said quietly. Just a chance. Maria studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Okay, she whispered. We'll take it slow. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A stranger in his own story. The following days passed in a blur of cautious introductions and unspoken tensions. Sam visited every morning before his rounds, lingering by Rosie's bedside as she regained strength. At first, their interactions were limited, brief exchanges of words, careful smiles, a soft-spoken hello, Dr. Carter. He hated the way she said it. Dr. Carter. Not Dad. Not even Sam. Just another doctor in her world. Maria kept a watchful distance, guarding Rosie like a lioness protecting her cub. She didn't trust easily. He understood why. Still, he persisted. He brought her a small sketchbook when he noticed how she loved coloring. He listened when she chattered about her favorite animals, her fascination with space, and how she wanted to be an astronaut. Slowly, she warmed up to him. One morning, as he entered the room, Rosie beamed at him. Mommy said you're the best doctor in the hospital. Sam chuckled, taking the seat beside her bed. Did she now? Rosie nodded enthusiastically. She also said you fix little hearts. His smile faltered. Her words carried more weight than she realized. That's my job, he said softly. Rosie studied him, then tilted her head. Did you fix my heart too? Something in his chest cracked. He wanted to tell her the truth, that her heart had been broken long before she ever entered that operating room, that he had been the one who should have been there all along. Instead, he reached out and gently tapped her nose. I think your heart is already pretty strong. Rosie giggled. That's what Mommy says too. Sam glanced at Maria, who stood by the window, pretending not to listen. Their eyes met. There were still walls between them, but brick by brick, they were starting to come down. The weight of fatherhood. Maria insisted that Sam keep his involvement limited to hospital visits for now. She wasn't ready to tell Rosie the truth yet. Sam didn't push, though every instinct screamed at him to demand more. Instead, he tried to prove himself in the only way he knew how, by showing up. He brought her favorite books and read to her when Maria needed a break. He sat with her at mealtimes, coaxing her to eat when she felt too tired. He even let her win at their little card games, though he suspected she was sharp enough to notice. But even with all of that, he was still an outsider. Rosie laughed easily with Maria, clung to her when she was scared, sought comfort in her arms. With him, there was a distance, a hesitance. One evening, as Sam prepared to leave, Rosie hesitated before speaking. Will you come back tomorrow? His chest ached. She was trying. So was he. I'll be here, he promised. For the first time, she smiled and said, Good night, Dr. Carter. Not Dad. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe someday. Maria's confession. One night, as Sam stepped into the hospital's rooftop garden for air, he found Maria already there. She sat on a wooden bench, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the city skyline. He hesitated before approaching. You okay? Maria exhaled. No. That was new. She rarely admitted weakness. He sat beside her, waiting. I've spent 5 years trying to be everything for her, Maria said finally. Both mother and father. And now, suddenly, you're here. And I don't know how to let go. Sam looked at her carefully. You don't have to let go, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. She let out a bitter laugh. I don't know how to need help, Sam. You never did, he murmured. Not even back then. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken memories. Finally, Maria whispered, She's going to love you, you know. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. A terrifying thought. A beautiful one. Is that what scares you? He asked quietly. Maria didn't answer. She didn't need to. One step closer. The day Rosie was discharged from the hospital, Sam found himself standing outside Maria's car as she buckled their daughter into the backseat. The child who had once been a stranger. The daughter he was desperate to know. Rosie looked up at him. "Will I see you again soon?" Sam crouched beside the car door, his voice gentle. "Would you like that?" She nodded. Maria's eyes softened, but her expression remained guarded. "We'll figure something out." It wasn't much, but it was more than before. As Maria drove away, Rosie waved at him through the window. Sam stood there, watching them disappear down the road, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. He had saved his daughter's life. Now he had to earn his place in it. A father's first steps. A house too quiet. Samuel Carter had always believed he was content with his life. His home was pristine, his routine disciplined, and his career demanding enough to keep him from dwelling on things like loneliness. But now, sitting alone in his apartment, his mind kept circling back to a little girl with dark curls and big, curious eyes. Rosie. His daughter. The realization still felt surreal, even after a week of hospital visits, cautious conversations with Maria, and the slow, delicate process of earning Rosie's trust. But tonight, the silence in his home felt unbearable. No soft giggles echoing in the background. No tiny voice asking him questions about the stars or why ducks liked puddles. No little girl curling into his side, trying to stay awake through bedtime stories. Sam leaned forward, running a hand down his face. He had saved countless children, given their families hope. But how did he become a father overnight? Could he? The truth gnawed at him. His entire life had been built around discipline and control. There had never been room for something as unpredictable as parenthood. Yet, when Rosie had smiled at him before leaving the hospital, it had felt more fulfilling than any medical breakthrough. He needed to see her again. The invitation. The next morning, as Sam pulled into the driveway of the small weathered apartment complex where Maria and Rosie lived, he hesitated. Would she even let him in? Would Rosie be excited to see him, or would she cling to Maria, unsure about the strange doctor who kept showing up? He had no answers, only questions. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Maria opened the door, surprised but not unkind. A cautious look passed over her features before she stepped aside. "Rosie's coloring," she said simply, leading him inside. The apartment was small but full of warmth. The scent of vanilla lingered in the air. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator. A worn-out pink stuffed rabbit sat on the couch, its ears lopsided from years of love. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Rosie. She looked up, her eyes widening when she saw him. Dr. Carter. His chest tightened at the title. Maria glanced at him, as if waiting to see how he'd respond. Sam knelt down to her level, offering a small smile. "Just Sam is fine." Rosie tilted her head, considering. "Mommy says you're special," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Because you saved me." His throat tightened. "Your mommy is a very smart lady." Maria rolled her eyes behind them. "Obviously." Rosie giggled, then patted the spot next to her. "Do you want to color with me?" For a moment, Sam was frozen. Of all the scenarios he had imagined, he hadn't expected this. A simple invitation. A chance. He sat down beside her, his expensive slacks creasing as he crossed his legs awkwardly. Rosie handed him a purple crayon and pointed at the blank sheet in front of him. "Draw a kitty." Sam frowned, holding the crayon like it was a scalpel. Maria snorted from the couch. "Oh, this I have to see." Rosie giggled. "You don't know how." Sam sighed dramatically. "I'm afraid I only know how to draw hearts." Rosie beamed. "That's okay. I'll teach you." Maria's eyes softened. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. The first outing. A few days later, Maria hesitated as she adjusted Rosie's tiny backpack. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Sam stood beside his car, hands in his pockets, watching as Rosie bounced excitedly on her heels. "You said we should take it slow." he reminded her. "It's just a trip to the zoo." Maria sighed. "I know she's never gone anywhere without me before." He understood. Maria had been Rosie's entire world for 5 years. Letting someone else in, trusting someone else with her, wasn't easy. She knelt down to Rosie's level. "Listen, sweetheart, stay close to Sam. Okay? And if anything feels wrong—" I know, Rosie interrupted, sighing dramatically. "Use my inside voice and don't climb on the fences." Maria gave her a look, then glanced up at Sam. "She's fearless." Sam smiled. "I noticed." Rosie tugged at his hand. "Come on. We have to see the penguins first." Maria crossed her arms. "She's obsessed." "I like penguins," Sam admitted. Rosie gasped. "Me too." Maria shook her head with an amused smile. "Have fun." As they drove off, Sam glanced in the rearview mirror. Rosie was smiling at him. And for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Little moments, big steps. The zoo visit turned into something more than just an outing. It became a memory. Sam watched as Rosie pressed her hands against the glass of the penguin exhibit, her eyes wide with wonder. "They look like tiny doctors," she declared, "with their black and white suits." Sam chuckled. "I suppose they do." She turned to him suddenly. "Do you ever get scared when you're fixing people?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted. Rosie tilted her head. "Then why do you do it?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Because I want to help people. To make sure they have more time with the ones they love." Rosie considered this, then took his hand. "You're really good at it." A lump formed in his throat. "Thanks, kiddo." And just like that, the invisible distance between them grew a little smaller. A quiet realization. That night, as he dropped Rosie off at Maria's, something unexpected happened. Rosie ran up to Maria, hugging her tightly. Before turning back to Sam, she hesitated. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around his waist in a quick hug before darting inside. Sam stood frozen. Maria, watching from the doorway, smirked. "Congratulations." He swallowed hard, feeling something stir deep inside him. "What for?" "You're not Dr. Carter anymore," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Sam blinked, still processing. Then, from inside, Rosie called out, "Good night, Sam." His heart clenched. He hadn't even realized when it had changed. One step closer to Dad. That night, Sam lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, the silence in his apartment didn't feel comforting. It felt empty. His life had always been meticulously organized, his days carefully structured around saving lives. But now, there was something else. Someone else. A little girl with dark curls and a bright smile. A daughter who had no idea how much she was already changing him. Sam exhaled slowly, one step at a time. Someday, he would hear her call him Dad. And when she did, he wanted to be ready. Building bridges, mending hearts. The struggle of patience. Samuel Carter had never been good at waiting. As a surgeon, he thrived on precision, action, and immediate results. His entire career was built on making quick, decisive moves that changed lives in an instant. But fatherhood was different. It was slow, messy, uncertain. And right now, as he sat on Maria's worn-out couch, watching Rosie carefully arrange stuffed animals for an imaginary tea party, he had never felt more out of his element. "Dr. Waddle sits here," Rosie declared, placing the stuffed penguin at the head of the tiny plastic table, "and Hoppy gets the special flower cup." Sam blinked at the rabbit with the missing ear. "What about me?" Rosie studied him, then held out a tiny teacup. "You can be the doctor who checks on everyone." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "That seems fitting." Maria, who had been folding laundry nearby, hid a smirk. "Look at that, Carter. You're finally being promoted from observer to participant." Sam shot her a dry look, but accepted the tiny cup anyway. Rosie beamed. He didn't care if it was a pretend tea party. This was progress. A father's first lesson. Later that evening, as Maria prepped dinner, Rosie tugged on Sam's sleeve. "Can you help me with my puzzle?" Sam followed her to the small coffee table, where a half-finished puzzle of a castle lay scattered. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked, settling beside her. "Since forever." Rosie huffed dramatically. "Mommy says I should start with the corners, but that's boring." Sam chuckled. "Your mom is right." Rosie narrowed her eyes. "You're on her team, aren't you?" "Guilty." With a dramatic sigh, she picked up a puzzle piece and frowned. "I always get stuck." Sam picked up a piece and turned it in his hands. "Sometimes, you just need to look at things from a different angle." He rotated the piece and fit it into place. Rosie's eyes widened. "Whoa. See?" He tapped the puzzle. "Not impossible. Just tricky." Rosie tested a few more pieces, her frustration giving way to determination. A quiet realization settled over Sam. This wasn't just about puzzles. It was about patience, about showing up, about helping her figure things out without taking over. Fatherhood wasn't about having all the answers. It was about guiding her toward finding her own. Maria's wall of doubt. That night, after Rosie had gone to bed, Maria leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Sam with crossed arms. "You're good with her," she admitted. "Better than I thought you'd be." He set down his glass of water. "But," Maria hesitated, "but this is the easy part." Sam frowned. "Easy?" Maria exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Tea parties, puzzles, zoo visits, those are fun. But what happens when she has a nightmare? When she's sick at 2 in the morning? When she needs help with schoolwork and you have back-to-back surgeries?" Sam's jaw tightened. "I'll figure it out." Maria scoffed. "That's not how parenting works, Sam. You don't just figure it out. You make choices, hard ones. And Rosie, she doesn't need a part-time dad." Something inside him snapped. "I never said I'd be part-time." Maria studied him carefully. "Then prove it." Her words stung, but deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. Rosie deserved more than occasional visits and carefully planned outings. She deserved consistency, stability, and he was going to give it to her. Emergency wake-up call. A week later, Sam was jolted awake by his phone vibrating on his nightstand. It was 2:47 a.m. Maria's name flashed on the screen. His heart pounded as he answered. "Maria." "Sam," she said, her voice tight with panic. "Rosie has a fever. It's high -104. She's shaking. I don't know if I should take her to the ER or—" "I'm on my way." He was already throwing on a shirt before she could respond. The first real test. By the time Sam arrived at Maria's apartment, she was pacing in the living room, clutching a damp washcloth. Rosie lay curled on the couch, her tiny frame trembling under a blanket. Her face was flushed, and her breaths came in soft, uneven gasps. Sam knelt beside her, his hand automatically moving to her forehead. "Too warm." "Hey, kiddo," he murmured. "Not feeling too great, huh?" Rosie whimpered, barely opening her eyes. "My tummy hurts." Maria's hands clenched the washcloth. "I don't know what to do." Sam turned to her. "Has she been drinking fluids? She won't keep anything down." "Okay," he said, his mind shifting into medical mode. "We need to bring her fever down first. Cool compresses, small sips of water. If she doesn't improve in an hour, we'll take her in." Maria nodded, gripping the back of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her standing. Sam could see it, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of 5 years of doing this alone. She didn't need to say it. He could see the unspoken plea in her eyes. "Help me." For the first time, she wasn't pushing him away. And for the first time, he wasn't walking away. The longest night. Sam stayed. He sat on the floor beside the couch, keeping a cool cloth on Rosie's forehead, whispering soft reassurances whenever she stirred. Maria dozed off in the armchair, too exhausted to fight sleep. At some point, Rosie's fever began to break. Her breathing steadied, the trembling eased, and when her tiny hand reached for his in the middle of the night, Sam's heart nearly broke. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." The morning after, Maria woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up groggily, her eyes landing on the sight of Sam in the kitchen, pouring 2 cups, one for her, one for himself. He looked exhausted, but he was still here. "Her fever broke," he said softly, nodding toward Rosie, who was now sleeping peacefully. Maria let out a shaky breath. Thank God. Sam handed her the coffee, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself lean on someone else. "You meant it, didn't you?" she murmured after a moment. He frowned. "Meant what?" "That you're not walking away." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I meant it." Maria studied him for a long moment before nodding. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe him. A new beginning. That morning, as Rosie woke up groggy but smiling, she turned to Sam and whispered something that made his chest tighten. "Thanks for staying, Daddy." The word landed between them, heavy and unexpected. Maria's breath hitched. Sam's world shifted. But Rosie just smiled, closing her eyes again. She had said it so naturally, like she had always known it was true. And for the first time, so did he. The burden of secrets. A word that changes everything. Daddy. The word still echoed in Samuel Carter's mind, rattling around like an unexpected diagnosis he hadn't prepared for. He had spent weeks slowly building a connection with Rosie, learning her favorite foods, watching her carefully construct her puzzles, listening to her endless chatter about space and animals. And now, just like that, she had called him Daddy. Not Sam, not Dr. Carter. Daddy. A word that meant something real, something permanent. He should have been overjoyed. But instead, he felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. Maria hadn't looked at him after it happened. Not when he carried Rosie back to bed. Not when he whispered a quiet goodnight and stepped into the hallway. And now, as they sat in her kitchen drinking coffee in the early morning light, she still wouldn't meet his eyes. "You heard her," he said finally, his voice quiet. Maria's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "I heard. You're not going to talk about it." Maria let out a slow, measured breath. "She doesn't know the truth yet, Sam." He frowned. "She's figuring it out. She's a smart kid." Maria flinched, setting her mug down harder than necessary. "I know that, but she's never known what it's like to have a father. She doesn't understand what it means." Sam's jaw tightened. "Then we tell her." Maria shook her head, her dark eyes flashing. "Not yet." His frustration bubbled up. "Maria, you don't get to push this." The words came out sharp, laced with something that sounded suspiciously like fear. Sam exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not trying to push. But she's already saying it. She's already choosing me. So why are we still waiting?" Maria finally looked at him, and the weight of her exhaustion, of 5 years of carrying this secret alone, hit him like a freight train. "Because I'm scared," she admitted. "What if she gets used to having you around and then something happens? What if work pulls you away? What if this, us, co-parenting, gets too hard and you decide she's better off without you?" Sam's chest tightened. "That's not going to happen." Maria gave him a sad smile. "You say that now, but you have no idea what it's like to raise a child. You've never had to make the kind of sacrifices I've made. You don't know what it's like to be someone's entire world." Sam leaned forward, his voice rough with emotion. "I do now." Maria stared at him for a long moment, her walls wavering. Then she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We'll tell her," she murmured, "but when the time is right." Sam swallowed his frustration. For now, that would have to be enough. A taste of fatherhood. The next few weeks brought something new, normalcy. Rosie no longer hesitated before climbing into Sam's lap when they read bedtime stories. She no longer looked to Maria for approval before asking Sam to play with her. She trusted him, and it terrified him. Because trust was fragile. One mistake, and it could shatter. "Can Daddy take me to the park today?" Rosie asked one Saturday morning, looking at Maria expectantly. Sam nearly dropped his coffee. Maria hesitated, glancing at Sam. "Daddy." She hadn't corrected her. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Maria took a slow breath. "If Daddy wants to take you, then sure." Sam stiffened at her wording. Maria wasn't ready to admit it out loud, but she was acknowledging it. It was a start. An unwelcome visit. The sound of a sharp knock interrupted their breakfast. Maria frowned, wiping her hands on a towel before heading to the door. Sam followed, a bad feeling settling in his stomach. When she pulled the door open, his worst suspicions were confirmed. Eleanor Harper stood there, dressed in an expensive coat, her lips pressed into a thin line. Sam's mother. The woman who had once tried to erase Rosie from existence. "What are you doing here?" Maria asked, her voice tight. Eleanor looked past her, eyes locking onto Sam. "We need to talk." Maria's stance shifted, subtly placing herself between Eleanor and the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about." Eleanor's gaze flickered toward Rosie, who was still sitting at the kitchen table, happily eating her cereal. Sam clenched his jaw. "Not here," he said. "Not in front of her." Maria exhaled sharply, then stepped aside. 5 minutes, she warned. Eleanor entered with the air of someone who believed she belonged everywhere. Sam resisted the urge to remind her that she didn't. A mother's regret. Eleanor perched on the edge of the couch, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her coat. She folded her hands in her lap, looking at Sam. "You've changed." He crossed his arms. "I had to." Her gaze flicked toward the kitchen, where Rosie's small voice hummed as she played with her toys. "She looks like you." Sam's jaw tightened. "She is mine." Eleanor's face softened. "I know, and that's why I'm here." Maria scoffed. "Oh, please, let me guess, you suddenly care. Now that she's too old for you to buy away." Eleanor flinched, but didn't argue. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I thought I was protecting Sam, his future, his career. But I see now that I was wrong." Maria's arms crossed. "You think a few words are going to fix this?" Eleanor met her gaze. "No, but I'd like to try." Sam watched Maria closely, knowing this was her battle to fight. She had raised Rosie. Alone. She had been the one to hold her through fevers, dry her tears, teach her how to ride a bike. She had every right to shut Eleanor out. But Maria hesitated. Rosie deserved a family. And Maria, for all her fierce protectiveness, had never wanted to take that from her. Finally, she spoke. "You want to be in her life?" she asked, her voice cold. "Then prove it. The way Sam has. The way I have. And if you ever try to hurt her again, you'll regret it." Eleanor nodded. Sam exhaled. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. A truth that can't wait. That night, as Sam tucked Rosie into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Are you really my daddy?" His breath caught. Maria had wanted to wait. But Rosie had figured it out herself. Sam sat on the edge of the bed, his voice soft. "Would you like me to be?" Rosie nodded. Sam swallowed the lump in his throat. "Then yes, sweetheart. I am." Rosie smiled, curling up under her blanket. "Okay. Just like that. No anger, no confusion. Just acceptance." Maria stood in the doorway, her eyes shimmering with something Sam couldn't quite name. Later, as they stood in the dimly lit hallway, she whispered, "I was scared she wouldn't be ready." Sam took her hand, squeezing it gently. "She was always ready, Maria. You were the one who needed time." She didn't deny it. She just squeezed his hand back. And for the first time, The weight of their past didn't feel so heavy. A future worth fighting for, learning to stay. Samuel Carter had spent his life running. Not in the physical sense, but in the ways that mattered. He ran from emotions, from attachments, from the kind of responsibility that couldn't be fixed with a scalpel and a well-rehearsed procedure. But now, as he stood in Maria's small kitchen, watching Rosie giggle over her bowl of cereal, he realized he didn't want to run anymore. He wanted to stay. And staying meant more than showing up. It meant being there. Always. Even when it was messy. Even when it was hard. Even when part of him still wondered if he was capable of being the father Rosie deserved. Maria's fear. The tension between Sam and Maria had shifted. It wasn't a battle anymore. But there was still something unspoken lingering between them. One evening, as they sat together after putting Rosie to bed, Maria sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. Sam frowned. "Do what?" She exhaled, staring at the coffee mug in her hands. "Share her." His chest tightened. "You don't have to. We're doing this together." Maria let out a bitter laugh. "Together? Sam, you're a world-class surgeon. Your schedule is insane. Your life is," she gestured vaguely, "bigger than this apartment. Bigger than us." Sam leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Rosie is my world now, Maria. She's not a side note. She's not a when I have time kind of thing. I'm here. For her. For you." Maria met his gaze, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. But for how long? That was her real fear. Not that he would leave. But that life, his career, his ambitions, would pull him away. Sam reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I missed 5 years of her life," he said softly. "I'm not missing another second." Maria's fingers tightened around his. And for the first time, she let herself believe him. The trial that could change everything. Maria had always been stubborn when it came to her health. But Sam noticed things. The way she pressed a hand to her chest when she thought no one was looking. The fatigue that crept in when she tried to do too much. The way she covered her coughs, as if pretending they weren't there would make them disappear. She had been sick for months. And he wasn't going to let her fight it alone. One morning, he sat her down, placing a thick stack of medical papers in front of her. "What's this?" Maria asked, brow furrowing. Sam folded his hands on the table. "A clinical trial. One of the best specialists in the country is running it. It's experimental, but the results have been promising." Maria's expression darkened. "Sam." "No." He cut her off before she could protest. "Just listen. This could give you more time. Better time. Rosie needs you." His voice cracked slightly. "I need you." Maria looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the papers. "I'm scared," she whispered. He reached out, tilting her chin up so she would look at him. "So am I. But I will be with you, every step of the way." Maria swallowed hard. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. Sam let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were going to fight this. Together. A different kind of surgery. For the first time in his life, Sam wasn't the one performing the surgery. He wasn't the one holding the scalpel, making precise incisions, controlling every outcome. He was on the other side of the operating room door, waiting, praying, hoping. Rosie sat beside him in the hospital waiting room, clutching her stuffed penguin, Dr. Waddles. She looked up at him, eyes filled with quiet worry. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Sam forced a smile. "She's in the best hands." Rosie nodded, but then she scooted closer, pressing her small hand into his. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. Sam squeezed her hand. "Me too, sweetheart." A new beginning. Maria's recovery was slow. There were good days. Days when she had the energy to take Rosie to the park. Days when they sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching old cartoons. And there were bad days. Days when the fatigue weighed her down, when the pain became too much, when Sam had to carry her to bed despite her protests. But through it all, he was there. Every doctor's appointment, every late-night fever, every moment of doubt. He stayed. One evening, as Maria sat curled on the couch, Rosie asleep in her lap, she looked over at Sam. "You really meant it, didn't you?" He frowned. "Meant what?" "That you're not leaving." Sam leaned back, stretching his arm along the couch. "I told you," he murmured. "I don't run anymore." Maria smiled softly, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in years, she let herself rest. A house that feels like home. Months later, Sam pulled up to a small house just outside the city. Maria and Rosie sat in the car beside him, staring up at the charming two-story home with wide eyes. "You bought a house?" Maria asked, stunned. "For us," Sam said simply. "For you and Rosie." Rosie gasped, practically vibrating with excitement. "We have a house, a real house." Sam turned to Maria, his voice softer. "You don't have to say yes, but I want to build something real with you, with our family." Maria stared at him for a long time. Then, without a word, she leaned over and kissed him. Rosie shrieked dramatically. "You." Maria laughed against his lips. And in that moment, everything felt right. A forever kind of love. One night, as Sam tucked Rosie into bed, she grabbed his hand. "Daddy?" He smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are we a real family now?" His chest tightened. He thought about the lonely nights, the missed years, the mistakes. Then he thought about the laughter that now filled their home. The warmth, the love. He kissed her forehead gently. "We always were, sweetheart." Rosie grinned, curling under her blankets. Sam turned off the light, stepping into the hallway where Maria stood, watching. "You okay?" she asked softly. He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I am now." And for the first time, he truly was. A future worth fighting for. A house full of firsts. Moving into the new house felt like stepping into a dream. One that didn't belong to just Sam, but to all of them. It wasn't just a house. It was their home. The first night, Rosie ran from room to room, mapping out every detail in her little mind. "This will be my art room," she declared, pointing at a cozy nook by the window. Sam chuckled. "I thought this was your bedroom." "No," Rosie laughed. "I get both. Duh." Maria smirked at Sam from across the hall. "She's learning negotiations early. Watch out." As the night settled, the house filled with new firsts. Rosie's first night in her new bed. Maria's first time cooking in a kitchen big enough for them to move without bumping into each other. Sam's first moment of looking around and realizing, this is what home feels like. It wasn't the walls or the space. It was them. A name that matters. One evening, Sam was reading Rosie a bedtime story when she suddenly turned to him, a thoughtful look on her face. "Daddy?" Sam still wasn't used to how much that word mattered. "Yeah, sweetheart." Rosie bit her lip. "Why isn't my last name Carter?" Sam's breath caught. Maria, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, stiffened. Rosie continued, her small fingers twisting in her blanket. "All the kids at school have the same name as their daddies, but I'm Rosie Ellis, not Rosie Carter." Sam's heart ached, not because she was questioning it, but because it mattered to her, and that mattered to him. Maria walked in slowly, sitting on the edge of Rosie's bed. "Sweetheart, your name is special, just like you." Rosie nodded but still looked at Sam. "Do you want me to be a Carter?" Sam swallowed the lump in his throat. "Only if you want to be." Rosie sat up straighter, determination shining in her eyes. "I do." Maria's eyes met Sam's over Rosie's head. There was no hesitation. They had already become a family. Now, they would make it official. The day everything became official. The adoption process was long, full of paperwork and legal discussions, but none of it mattered. Because the day Rosie legally became Rosie Carter, she threw her arms around Sam's neck and whispered, "Now I get to be yours forever." Sam closed his eyes, holding her tight. "You always were, sweetheart. Love that stays." Years passed, but one thing never changed. Sam never ran again. He was there for every school recital, every scraped knee, every bedtime story that turned into 3. He was there when Rosie got sick, when she painted on the walls by accident, and once, on purpose, and when she beamed with pride after acing her first big school project. And he was there for Maria. Through every doctor's appointment, through the exhaustion, through the recovery. He stayed. Through the good and the bad. Through the love and the struggles. Through everything. A life he never knew he needed. One night, as Sam stood outside Rosie's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully, Maria came up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. Still watching over her, she teased. He smirked. "Always." Maria looped her fingers through his. "You've changed, you know." Sam turned to her, brushing a stray curl from her face. "You changed me." Maria's eyes softened. "We changed each other." He cupped her face, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he murmured. Maria smiled, tilting her head up. "I love you too." As they stood there, the house quiet around them, Sam realized something. He had spent years trying to build a career. But this was the greatest thing he had ever built. A family, a home, a life worth staying for, and he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.